I'm Jackie Cohen-Roth, founder, CEO of Cannabis MD. Welcome to another Cannabis MD profile, and I am very excited today to welcome Professor Michael Barnes, who is instrumental in helping to establish medical cannabis in the UK. So we're going to run through his background a bit and what he is focused on today, as well as a uh, relatively deep dive into what is happening with medical cannabis in the UK. Dr. Barnes will be joined by three other medical cannabis industry subject matter experts on January 19th, 2022, just about a month away, for a review of the need for standardization of medical cannabis science education for physicians across the globe. So, welcome, Dr. Barnes. It's a real pleasure to have you
Thank
here.
you. Thank you for asking me, Jackie. It's great.
Thank you. So we before jumping on and recording, I was asking you about the difference between titling of physicians in the UK. But before we get into clarification on that, if you'd please share your background. My understanding is that you're a trained neurologist. If you are
Yeah.
practicing today, and then what led you to medical cannabis?
Yeah, sure. I'll try and keep it brief. But as you say, I'm a neurologist, trained as a neurologist. And for many years, I worked in mainly in the field of multiple sclerosis and then spasticity management and finally traumatic brain injury and worked largely in neurological rehabilitation more than acute diagnostic neurology. But I've been interested in cannabis for about 20 years.
Mhm.
That stemmed back from my days when I was doing multiple sclerosis clinics in the UK and spasticity clinics.
Mhm.
And a lot of the people were coming just spontaneously talking to me in the clinic and saying they were using cannabis and it was helpful for their pain and their muscle spasm. And so just very informally, I never published it, but very informally, I just asked everyone who turned up to the clinics, which was about 60 or 70 people in the north of England where I practice in Newcastle. Um, and about half of those people in the clinics were admitted to me they were using cannabis.
Mhm.
Maybe more who didn't admit it to me. I don't know, because it was way illegal then and still is to an extent. So I thought, well, there must be something to this, because these guys wouldn't want to criminalize themselves if it
Right.
wasn't if this medicine wasn't actually doing something for them. So I got interested in it then, and then by chance, because of my work in spasticity, I was asked by GW Pharma to help them with the development of what turned out to be the first cannabis medicine, which is Sativex, still is Sativex, and I believe that's available across North America
Right.
for the management of spasticity and multiple sclerosis. Um, then nothing much happened for about a decade because cannabis was still illegal in the UK. Sativex was available but not widely used. Um, but then all of a sudden there was another hardly an explosion, a fluttering, shall we say, of interest about 4 or 5 years ago now in the UK, probably on the back of the work done from many of the American states and Canada in particular. And I was asked to do a report for a government body on drug policy reform. Um, and I think it's one of those things where you write the only thing in the subject area, and everyone thinks you're an expert because there's no one else to go to. Um, there's some truth in that, and I was a bit then involved in it much more robustly. Then, most particularly, I was asked to get involved with what turned out to be the first prescription of cannabis in the UK for the child Alfie Dingley, and his mother Hannah Deacon, I believe, has been on your
Yeah,
program.
yeah, I had the pleasure of
Yeah,
meeting Hannah in at a conference in Malta late 2019, and then hosting
yeah,
her
yeah.
same platform early 2020, and the power of her advocacy and this
She's a
incredible
wonderful
story.
advocate.
Yes, she
Absolutely.
is. Yes.
She's a very powerful woman and she advocated brilliantly for her child. And as a result of her campaign, the law changed in the UK. Alfie got his license in summer 18. And then within 5 months of that, the law had changed.
Hmm.
So the government did a complete U-turn over the period of time. And
It's a pretty significant timeline to change a law, 5 months. I mean,
that was remarkable. I mean,
yeah,
even we
yeah,
didn't think it's going to happen that quickly.
yeah,
But a massive media pressure. We
yeah.
had all the national outlets and radio and television on our side, and the government, sadly, governments don't generally respond to evidence and science. They only when it suits them. I'm going to be slightly cynical there. but they respond to media. And if the media is behind something like Alfie, the law changed. And so I've then been involved since the law changed on the 1st of November 2018 in the UK to allow doctors, some doctors, we can clarify that if we want to go into the detail, to prescribe medical cannabis for any condition, actually. That's any condition, yeah.
And my understanding is that, so what types of physicians in the UK, and it's also a difference in that you're using the word prescribe versus in the States very carefully because of Schedule 1, physicians are recommending. And so in the UK, you have cannabis, my understanding, has been rescheduled from a Schedule 1, which does have that same, it's a parallel to the to Schedule 1 in the US, and then now it's Schedule 2. So what does that, how does that impact as who can prescribe cannabis in the UK?
Yeah, you're right. It's moved for certain circumstances to Schedule 2. And that means in the UK, it was slightly bizarre. They allowed doctors on what we call the specialist register of the General Medical Council. And they basically, that's hospital-based consultants. So a consultant neurologist or consultant in pain medicine or consultant psychiatrist, whatever, can prescribe. Although interestingly, general practitioners, primary care physicians, can prescribe under the direction of the specialist. So a specialist has got to initiate the prescription, and it's a proper prescription, not a recommendation. And then thereafter, the GP or a junior doctor or even a pharmacist can continue the prescription. So it's all a bit back to front, because I think maybe we'll talk about cannabis is very much a general practitioner, primary care medicine in many ways, particularly anxiety and pain. Maybe not the specialist end of the spectrum like pediatric epilepsy. And I think it was a mistake. I think, and we're now lobbying for general practitioners, as we call them in the UK, to be able to initiate the prescription. So that was, when the law change was remarkable, but it hasn't really, I thought that's my job done. I can now retire and think of something else to do in my life. That hasn't really happened, because in the National Health Service, and 90% of our medicine in the UK is through our nationalized health service, the NHS, we've had 3 prescriptions written in the entire country.
So that is the difference right there as well with the UK versus the US. So this is cannabis is being reimbursed, or is there's no cost to the patient, versus it's can be extremely, or it is expensive to patients who are using it on a regular basis.
Well, it is, and now in the UK we have 11,500 patients prescribed, but all bar 3 are in the private sector. So all bar those 3, one of which is Alfie, have to pay for their prescription, and it's not reimbursed. And that's a real issue, because although cannabis is fundamentally cheap, when you've added in all the margins of everyone up the chain and the doctor's consultation fees and everything else, it's not that cheap as an entity to prescribe. And the average cost in the UK for a prescription is roughly £500 sterling a month. What's that, about $700?
Yeah, about $700, yeah.
Yeah, a month. And that's, a lot of people can't afford anything like that. That's significant. And some of the children, of course, need more. They're looking at 2,000, which is sort of roughly $2,500 a month. That's way out of pocket of most people. And so the National Health Service, mainly due to the intransigence of some of my senior medical colleagues, and to an extent the unhelpful attitude of the government, despite the fact they changed the law, has restricted this to only people who can afford it, which I think is very sad and absolutely not right.
Yeah. And you had a very powerful, I had heard you on a podcast speak to the economic impact that like Alfie, where with Hannah had shared Alfie's, her journey, the family's journey with Alfie, where seizuring hundreds of times a week, having to move to Holland to access the medicine, and then it was unsustainable for the family to stay in the UK. So the awareness needs to be raised, is not only is this having access to medical cannabis and utilizing it as a medicine, is the impact obviously on the patient, but on the family. How do parents
exactly
the relationship of the parents to be able to hold down a job, that all of this. So if you would run through those numbers, it was rather significant that I heard you run through the impact.
Yeah, and we did it. Okay, it's not a health economic study by any means, and we're
Right.
actually now organizing a proper health economic study, which has been done very little around the world. But anyway, going back to Alfie, he was admitted 48 times to the pediatric intensive care unit in a year. Now that's about roughly $4,000 a night. You add that in, you add in the ambulance costs, you add in the medicine costs that he had to have when he was in the hospital. And just taking those costs, just the health costs, not anything else about the quality of life to the family, the fact that Hannah couldn't work and such like, just adding those costs, we reckon we've saved the National Health Service about £100,000. That's roughly, what is that, $120,000, $130,000 per annum. And that's even taking into account an inflated cannabis price, because there's so little, there's no economies of scale in cannabis yet. It's costing the National Health Service about £40,000 a year to give him his cannabis, which is way over what it should be costing if there's more prescription. If you then take into account the whole economic impact on the family and families generally, of more parents being able to work, in adults prescription, of course, more people getting back into work, less benefits, let alone the quality of life and the intangible costs. I mean, I know you can introduce cannabis into a health system at zero net cost, if not a slight saving. Now, I can't prove that because a robust health economic study has not yet been done, which we desperately need to do anywhere in the world. I'm astonished, actually, no one's really got into that, but they haven't. So there's no doubt we can save money introducing cannabis. It's fundamentally a cheap product.
And then, yeah, it is fundamentally cheap. And in the US, as you well know, is that there is no standardization across the states of taxation, of course, and that impacts the patients, tax rates for the patients. Either there's little or no tax versus the adult use. So, as well as the cannabis is allowed, permitted, we're growing it in the respective state, processing in the state. So if you'd give us an outline of what that looks like in the UK, that it is illegal to grow in the UK?
It is, yeah. It's illegal to grow. You can grow hemp, industrial hemp. But the crazy thing about industrial hemp is that according to the licensing in the UK, you have to destroy the hemp flowers, in which, of course, is the CBD. Crazy. So we have quite a thriving over-the-counter CBD market in the UK, where it's legal, as long as there is virtually no THC in the product, it's legal. But all that has to be imported. And the farmers who are growing hemp for industrial purposes, like fiber and such like, have to destroy the product that could make them more money and help and save develop a good quality British CBD industry. So that's crazy. I mean, but cannabis that's not hemp, in other words, any marijuana or cannabis plant over the allowed limit, which is very tiny, it's 1 milligram per container, or broadly speaking, 0.2%. That's illegal to grow at all unless you have a Schedule 1 grow license. And the only people until very recently who had that license was GW Pharma. And again, the big irony in the UK is that there was a time, I think it might still be the case, when GW Pharma were the biggest growers of cannabis in the world, all of which was exported to the States to make it Epidiolex. It's a crazy situation.
Quick background, GW, of course, with the first plant-based medicine being Epidiolex.
Exactly. They developed Sativex, which I mentioned earlier, and then they developed Epidiolex, which nothing wrong with that medicine. It's good, well done to them. They were ahead of the game in terms of developing cannabis medicines. And now I think there's a lot of competition, but that competition is stifled in the UK because it's very difficult to grow cannabis legally. Well, you can't grow it legally without a Schedule 1 license, and that's very difficult to get.
What is what are the top countries for importing where the UK patients are getting the access to the medicine?
Yeah, we now have about 16 licensed producers with product in the UK. In the initial influx was from Canada, not surprisingly, the big players like Canopy and Althea and Afria. We now have quite a range of product from, addition to Canada, Israel and Australia are the main, and a little bit from Colombia recently. They're the main source of importing.
Yeah, and as just giving it some thought, is that similar? Why hasn't anybody done an economic impact study as well as
Yeah,
fear? That's all I can characterize it as. And the stigma, this powerful stigma that remains is
yeah,
to do a study of, okay, if the concern is that this is indeed a gateway drug, how many patients have had psychotic episodes? How many
uh,
patients have moved on
yeah.
to heroin? The fear.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's not a
Yeah,
gateway drug.
it's
It's That's a ridiculous argument. And the paper by Hickman, I think it was a couple of years ago, showed you
mhm,
had to stop. I think it was 18,000 men and 29,000 women to prevent one episode of schizophrenia come psychosis. It's a risk, and I wouldn't prescribe with someone with active psychosis. But
yeah.
if you prescribe sensibly, particularly the medical type of products and not the recreational high THC products, the
Mhm,
chances of psychotic episode is not zero, but it's virtually zero.
yeah.
It's tiny. And so, we've got a plant here that's remarkably safe. It's not going to benefit everybody. You wouldn't expect it to, but it's a really good plant. The risk benefit analysis on anyone's sensible scale is way in favor of trying cannabis for some of these conditions.
Mhm.
And the resistance we've got from the senior medical bodies in the UK is ridiculous, frankly.
Do you believe that this is the pressure from the pharmaceutical industry?
I think, yeah, I think there's several things. I think there's the stigma attached to it. The senior, therefore older physicians think, well, this is a recreational product. It can't possibly have any medical value without bothering to look into it. I think there is a real stigma. I think there's a real, and in a sense, I understand this more than anything, is they say there's not enough evidence, but they're looking at it as if it's a pharmaceutical product, and it isn't. If you say,
Mhm,
well, how many randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled studies have you got on cannabis? The number is there, but it's small.
mhm,
And would it pass the sort of pharmaceutical new medicines standard for RCT? Probably not. But they ignore the mass of real world evidence that's out there, the observational studies, the case studies, N01
mhm,
studies, case control studies. That evidence is overwhelming. And that's the problem we've got, is that these medical bodies look at it as a pharmaceutical product, which it isn't and never will be, and
mhm,
think therefore the evidence is a bit lacking. Could there be pressure from the pharmaceutical industry? Yes, there has been, undoubtedly. For obvious reasons, they're going to lose out. But the figure from the States is what, 25% less opioid prescription,
mhm,
et cetera, less anti-anxiety drugs, less anticonvulsant drugs. And
mhm.
they're going to lose from their bottom line. And pharmaceutical companies don't like losing from their bottom line. So they're going to do their best to make sure we don't succeed. But they're not going to succeed. Cannabis as a medicine is here to stay.
Yeah, and we have now, I think it's over 50 countries across the globe,
Yeah,
have some
yeah,
version of a medical program. If we back it up a bit and explain the difference of medical cannabis and cannabis being a multi-molecule
yeah.
product versus a single molecule product that is a traditional pharmaceutical. Do I have that straight?
Absolutely. And of course, you can do a proper randomized control, double blind placebo study on a single molecule. Well, you can do it with even like Sativex is two, CBD and THC,
Mhm.
nearly pure products mixed together. You can do it on that, but you can't do it on a plant with 147 cannabinoids and 100 terpenes and 100 flavonoids. Every single every single batch is going to be slightly different,
Mhm.
let alone the problem of placebo control in a plant like that. So it will never work. It just doesn't lend itself. That paradigm is the wrong paradigm for assessing the efficacy and safety of a plant. And
Mhm.
what we really need in the UK and across the globe is a different approach to approvals of plant medicines or fungal medicines, looking at psilocybin in the near future. Like they
Mhm.
have in Holland, across the water from here, they've got an office of medicinal cannabis, and that office will deal with the regulations, the imports, the exports. It will look at the approval of growing. It will look at the regulations around cannabis and who can prescribe it. And getting all that expertise in one government department makes a lot of sense to me. At the moment, we're split between our health department, our
Mhm.
home office, which looks after the licensing, Department of Justice, that's looking at other things like the Proceeds of Crime Act we have here that prevents investment. There's three or four or five government departments and government quasi-government bodies looking to approve this and approve that. Some of which are very good, some of which, frankly, they don't know what they're talking about. And we need to combine that expertise. So we've got a proper government, I hesitate to use the words, but control system. And it does need some control and
Yeah,
regulation. Of
some
course it
it
does. Of
makes
course
yes.
it does.
Regulations are here for
Yeah.
a reason, and
A
particularly
reason, exactly. Yeah, but
talking
let's get
about
sensible
right,
regulations supervised by sensible people. That's what we're lacking at the moment.
right. And we're talking about patient safety, access to
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
reasonably
Yeah.
cost medicines. How about the work that you're doing? So you've got a number of initiatives in place.
Yeah.
Maple Tree Consulting,
Yeah.
a society that you've established to promote education. So if you'd share some of
Yeah, I'll tell you that if like we set up on the 1st of November when the law changed, we set up the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society, which now has, I think it's about 300 members of clinicians. They're not all prescribing doctors. They could be doctors who are interested but don't want to prescribe, or pharmacists, or health professionals. So that's good. We mainly focus on education, guidelines of how to prescribe. We do a whole series of webinars when we can get out and talk to each other again. We do conferences and such like. So I think that's quite a vibrant society. We've recently formed, I've chaired the thing called the Cannabis Industry Council, which now has about 100 members across the whole sector, from, greenhouse growers, hemp farmers, licensed producers, dispensaries, clinics, magazines, cannabis magazines, etc., etc. Everyone in the sector. We've got about 100 companies now that has a sort of lobbying trade body. That's good. And we have a couple of scientific initiatives from drug science called the 2021 program, which gives patients an opportunity to get cheaper product in exchange for completing various outcome measures. And then finally, we set up with Hannah Deacon, we mentioned earlier, set up Maple Tree Consultancy. We were both being asked to do consultancy work, helping establish clinics and dispensaries and getting product into the country. So we thought we'd join forces and set up a cannabis consultancy, which we call Maple Tree.
So, with a dispensary model, so we have, or what I would like to understand in the UK and to help our listeners and viewers understand what the model is
Yeah.
in the UK. So, within the US, where primarily where our audience is from, is that you have the three verticals: the cultivators, growers, the processors, the manufacturers, and then the point of sale, the dispensary, the retail experience. So what is that model in the UK?
Well, of course, in the UK, we're very lacking at the moment with growers because it's virtually all an imported market.
Right.
In the last month, two to three growers have got a cultivation license from the Home Office. And so next year, 2022, we'll begin to see UK crops product growing out, excluding hemp.
Is there any constraints, or what are the regulations as far as what they can grow? Is there?
No, they can grow. It's mainly the licenses focus on security concerns, as well as GMP standard growing and extraction facilities. But what they can grow is not limited. It's limited by the medical market. I mean, we're not going to produce very high THC, no CBD, recreational type products, because recreation is still illegal here. So we have growers at the moment. Producers are all imported. They have to be imported through a specially licensed importing pharmacy. There's only 3 or 4 in the whole country. Once it's in that pharmacy, then doctors can prescribe it. So doctors can sit in a clinic or wherever they like to prescribe. The licensed doctors, the doctors who are able to prescribe, write a prescription that then goes to one of the dispensaries, pharmacies, who then distribute the product. So it goes from the importer to the retail pharmacy, and there's now about half a dozen of those in the country. So we're still talking small numbers, and it goes direct to the patient from there. So that's very quickly, that's the system we have to work through at the moment.
Okay. All right. Thank you for clarifying on that. And jumping to the education, that is one of the reasons that brings us together is I regularly use the data point from a 2017 study out of the Washington University School of Medicine in the States, and only 9% of medical schools in the US include some form of cannabis science in their curriculum,
Yeah.
whereas now
Yeah.
the majority of US citizens have access to some form of cannabis. And
Yeah.
how is that? What's the parallel in that in the UK?
As far as I'm aware, it's not taught at all in any medical school in the
Uh-huh.
country, which is awful, really. I mean, particularly if you don't want to talk about cannabis, at least talk about the endocannabinoid system,
Right.
which is, the biggest, most important neurotransmitter system in the body. Every doctor should know about it.
Hmm.
The extent of ignorance about the endocannabinoid system is astonishing. And I was one of those, go back a few years, I did never heard of the endocannabinoid system. And that's not
And
good
this was
enough.
again established in the 1990s, early 1990s.
Exactly. I mean, okay, when I was training, it
Hmm.
hadn't been discovered because I'm so old. But for the last 30 years, we've known about the endocannabinoid system. Certainly for the last 20, we've known quite a lot of detail. And doctors need to know that.
Yeah.
There are now training entities in the country through the society, for example. I do a face-to-face training. I've trained about 200 doctors now. There was very, very recently, there's videos online training. There's some very good ones we get from the States. Doing the Gangier course at the moment, which is, so there's lots there online, but you have to really search for it. And as a doctor, I think it should be given to us rather than having to search for it and then pay for it. And
Right.
that doesn't happen. Yeah.
Right. And yes, and that is one of what I'm focused on with Cannabis MD is to fill this void and
Yeah.
understand that
Yeah.
each one of the specialties or the healthcare providers, the verticals, and so that they are literally speaking the same language of physicians talking to
Yeah.
physicians, nurse practitioners educating nurse practitioners, and
Yeah.
on down the line, and as well as that understanding is that although a healthcare professional may not be actually prescribing the medicine, but very likely, as we talking about over 50 countries across the globe having access,
Yeah.
that a patient is going to present if it's a social worker, for example, and to have an
Mm.
understanding of what medical cannabis is and the positive impact that it affords. I always say it's not a panacea. It doesn't work for everybody.
No,
And
exactly. Yeah.
yeah. And so how are you reaching the physicians in the UK?
That's a good question. Oh, lots of different ways. I mean, through the society is the main way. We push out information from the society. We have webinars every 2 weeks in the UK for an international audience, but they're mainly UK focused. We're pushing physicians to join the society. We're doing a lot, best we can at least, with ordinary lay media, pushing out stories. Recently, some of the cannabis clinics in the UK have put out leaflets to every doctor in the country saying it's now legal and available, because there's still
Hmm.
a lot of people, um, both lay public, doctors and police, for example, who still don't know that it's legal, which
Hmm.
is astonishing. I had a conversation with a police force in Brighton, just south of London recently, and nice guy who said, I've just found out it's legal. It's been legal for 3 years. And they've been arresting people with legal prescriptions and taking the prescriptions away from them because they thought it was illegal and this was just a con. So, there's an astonishing amount of ignorance about this still. And sadly, that includes a lot of the medical profession. So we're doing some things, but there's an awful long way we've got to go yet.
Yeah, and similarly, I'm rather astonished in the States is that public service announcements, are lacking. Is
Yeah.
that just as
Yeah.
you said, educating the police force that this is legal. You mentioned Holland, and sounds like you
Yeah.
consider Holland as a good model for regulatory standards. Other countries that you consider having good models?
That's a good question. I like the way they're doing it in Australia.
Hmm.
Um,
Anything
I
in
think that
particular there?
no, it's more open. They seem to be more open to the prescription. That the numbers are catching up there. They've got a decent training program for some of the doctors. So they've. I don't think any country's got it right. I have to say that.
Mhm.
Canada, I think there were issues with the Canadian rollout. I think some of your states in the US have got it right. And what we really do need is you to make it federally legal across there. And then that expertise that's at the moment confined to the individual state, like California or Colorado or whatever it is, that will come over, not just a bigger range of products, but a better range of delivery systems and also a better range of knowledge and experience that we are lacking. And so, it's time. I put all the pressure back on you for this one. You've got to persuade Joe Biden and whoever follows him to make it federally legal as fast as you can, please.
Right. Yeah. As you well know, lots of conversations in our political
Yeah,
parties. The Republicans, Democrats have each released a discussion draft on what federal legalization. I say the Republicans had it a bit easier, where the Democrats dropped theirs, where there
yeah,
was a bit of an uproar. That was a significant miss, was addressing the medical market and the existing patients, and
yeah.
how do we support the patients and continued access to the medicine. Um, so yeah, it is interesting, and that brings us to the where we're focused on January 19th in the discussion of standardization for education. What if you could say three? What would be three things that you think are critically needed for standardization of? And again, we're speaking to the physician audience.
Well, one standardization is that I think any doctor needs to understand the endocannabinoid system,
Hmm.
and just know that cannabis is not just an errant weed taken by a few hippies. It's a proper medicine, and it can really and the good it can do. I don't want every doctor, of course not, to be able to have that detailed knowledge to prescribe it, but I think one thing we must standardize if we possibly can is get medical schools in the UK to teach it, at least have a couple of modules, a couple of training sessions. This is the endocannabinoid system. This interacts with cannabis. This is the sort of thing it can help with. That's like we do for blood pressure pills and diabetes. And, a doctor emerging from a medical school needs to have a range of every subject. And then they specialize on top of that, of course. But
Hmm.
that's the first thing to do. The problem we've got in the UK, to divert just very slightly, is every medical school sets its own curriculum. There's not a national standard that they have to follow. So
Hmm.
you've got to go around 30 plus medical schools in the country, persuading each one of them to include cannabis on the curriculum. So which is makes it more difficult.
Right.
I'd
And
like to see that.
yeah. One of my colleagues in the States here had said that not including education on the ECS is like not covering the digestive or the cardiovascular system.
Exactly. It's a
Yeah,
major hole. Yeah, you can emerge as, without any knowledge of the heart or the brain or something. You need
right.
to understand the endocannabinoid system. It underpins every bodily function. Where any function that's subserved by a nerve is controlled by the endocannabinoid system.
Mhm.
That basically is all bodily functions. It's so fundamental. And if people understood that, I think we'd have less stigma and just more understanding about the potential value of this medicine. I think I've only come up with one standard. I think that I put that standard as 1, 2, and 3, to be honest, because
Yes.
it's so important. Just let's get it taught.
Yeah,
I'd
as I've
like,
heard you say,
yeah,
education, 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 and
education.
everything.
Yeah, exactly.
ECS, ECS, ECS.
Yeah, that's right. I'd like to see if we again, it's not right in British medicine hasn't gone down this line, but I think for cannabis is so different. I'd like to see any doctor who wants to prescribe it have to compulsorily go through a training course. Because
Yes.
we've seen a few doctors, not many, but a few doctors who've gone into this to make a quick buck, and they're prescribing ridiculous amounts of this, but they don't really know what they're doing. Any profession is going to have those people in it. So I would like to see a compulsory training for
Hmm.
doctors who want to prescribe. Fortunately, that's not the way the British medicine may not be the same in the States. It doesn't work like that. If a new antihypertensive drug comes out, you can just prescribe it. You don't have to go on a training course. And
Hmm.
like anything, once you're a doctor, you're a doctor. You can do what you like. But I think cannabis is so different, so personalized as a medicine. I'd love to see um, a simple training course as a compulsory mandated need before you can prescribe cannabis. That's the second standardization I'd like to
Hmm.
see.
Yeah, and we do have that, and again, not every state following
Yeah,
the same model, but
yeah, yeah,
that there is usually it's a 2-hour continuing medical education course.
yeah. You can do it
They're
in
so
simple
basic.
hours.
I've gone through them to
Yeah,
get behind the curtain to see what the
yeah,
elements have. And how about a third one? So we've got the ECS, compulsory training.
Or standardization for physicians,
Yes.
because I like to see education for the lay public as well.
Yeah.
And I'd love to see a specific course for politicians who do.
Yes, the policy influencers. And, as
Yeah,
I'm with you on that one, is that where I am in Maryland, on the east coast of the states, is that as there have been workforce or some work groups studying and listening to testimony on again, the House and the Senate
yeah,
side. Um, but I want to just yell at the screen sometimes at the legislators and say, we
yeah.
actually have a medical cannabis program in this state. You have voted on it, you've worked on it,
Yeah.
and here we are. And yeah, that is a miss, just as you said,
It
the
is a
police
complete
force not
mess.
understanding.
We had in the House of Parliament on last Thursday, we had a bill called the Cannabis Access Bill put forward by a opposition Labour MP. It was a 4-hour debate. And very good debate, some very, very good speakers on both sides of the political spectrum. But equally, there were 2 or 3 speakers who spouted absolutely unmitigated nonsense. Clearly just out of ignorance. I don't think they're deliberately being ignorant. I think they have got this thing in their mind about cannabis, and they don't move from that. And I'd love to see a training program for politicians, naively, but I think, and that bill didn't succeed. We knew it wouldn't. It was what's called talked out. So if you haven't got a decision after 4 hours, it drops.
Mm-hmm.
We knew that would happen, but
So
it's a
much like
shame.
filibuster, just keep going.
It was
Going.
filibuster. Exactly, it was just filibustered out, and we'll come back again. It will come back again, but we're really going to have to wait, probably for a change of government to get the law properly changed. So I haven't come up with a third one yet, have I? I've dodged around it. So yeah, I think those 2 doctors will be enough. If we just have those 2, we don't need a third. And if I have a third spare, I'd reserve it to educate politicians.
All right, and then jumping to another, with your experience in Sativex, as far as the future of medical cannabis, what do you see as exciting on the forefront? That I read recently about the cannabinoids being developed in the labs, and not from the plant. Which, and there's nothing, as I say, like Mother Nature, but what do you see?
Yeah. I said, well, first of all, I don't like that. I think there's good evidence that isolates or synthetics aren't as good as the real thing.
Is this that they're missing terpenes?
I think it's because the full plant has got all those minor cannabinoids and terpenes, and you can't replicate that. And it works like Epidiolex. I'm not want to criticize Epidiolex. It's nearly pure CBD, not quite. And it works for some children, but you can get pretty well twice the effect, from around 30, 40% to around 80% of efficacy on reduction of seizures, by using the full plant rather than Epidiolex. So why on earth would you develop a synthetic or an isolate product when you've got the full plant sitting out there? I know why people do, because then they can push you down the pharmaceutical route and get it licensed. But I think the future, well, first of all, the future of cannabis is here to stay. Cannabis is now. That's absolutely clear. It's only a matter of when, not if, we'll get it more widely available. I think we're going to see, quite rightly, more exploration of the benefit of minor cannabinoids. In the UK, we're way behind you, so forgive me, but we're getting a first CBG product into the UK to prescribe now. I think we're seeing CBC coming in, CBN products. And most particularly, what I think is really important is we're getting a little bit of early development of some of the terpene profiles in the prescribable products. We're seeing myrcene, a product came in from South Africa a couple of weeks ago that was high in limonene. And, I think the terpenes are so important, so underrated in the UK, at least, as the real drivers of medical benefit. The cannabinoids, somebody said, is the engine, but the terpenes are the drivers. And I like that. And we must understand more about the terpene profiles. And what our Cannabis Industry Council is trying to do is to mandate the producers to give us a full certificate of analysis that includes all the minor cannabinoids and terpenes and preferably other things like flavonoids in that product. So the doctors begin to understand, if I prescribe a product high in linalool, is that more helpful for someone with epilepsy or sleep or whatever? So that's the future.
Yeah, and that brings me to the last question that I have for
Yeah.
you is that so here in the States, and I have an issue, and how it's going to be resolved, but back to standardization, and this one goes to products, is that a concern that I have is how are we going to remove the stigma when I cannot see a physician writing a script, making a recommendation for something called granddaddy perp
Oh,
or
exactly.
um,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
what are the product names in the UK? So it's not, is it by a strain name, cultivator name, cultivar name like we have in the US, or is there more of a medically accepted naming?
It's a bit of a
No.
mess at the moment. Oils, and 40% of the prescriptions are currently for oil. They
Uh-huh.
tend to have medical type of names, which is fine. I think you're absolutely right. I can't see a doctor prescribing a gram a day of Gorilla Glue or,
Right.
say, AK-47 or something. The flowers in the UK, some have perfectly acceptable medical names. One come from South Africa, for example, called Isandro. It doesn't mean anything, but it's nothing upsetting about it.
Right.
But some are still coming in with Granddaddy Purple or Gorilla Glue or
Uh-huh.
whatever, and that's wrong. And we've got to, and that just doesn't help the medical cause, because that is clearly recreational. Nothing wrong with it from a recreational point of view, but it's not the way to persuade doctors to prescribe, but to say, I've got this really great AK-47 I'd like you to prescribe. It's we've got to change that.
Yes.
And we haven't succeeded yet. And some of the clinics are not helping, because they put out that we got 15 clinics in the UK now. That's all. And they will push out, they're allowed to say what they've got in stock, and they'll say, we've got this great import of, Gorilla Glue was the last one. And I don't stop saying that. Tell us what's in it.
Right.
I'm not interested in its seed name. I'm interested in what the product is, what cannabinoid profile, what terpene profile it's got in it, and stop telling us it's Gorilla Glue. So that's you can tell I agree with you 100% on that.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, we've run out of time, but there's a couple of talking points that will continue on January
Oh,
19th when we're together with your colleagues in the industry focused on what standardization for cannabis science education should look like for
great.
physicians in particular, how we should get there. So briefly, we spoke about the need for a certificate of analysis in the UK,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
you complimented my sign here.
I did.
And
I like your sign. Yeah.
yeah, and so to talk about what the impact of the war on drugs has been, generating from the states, and bouncing across the pond, so to speak. So look forward to that conversation as well.
I
So
look forward to. Yeah. Thank you.
yeah. Well, thank you, Professor Barnes, for generosity of your time, and we will see you
Not
on
at all.
January 19th.
Great. Have a good Christmas, everybody, and I'll see you in early January.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much.